we're going to be doing. Tonight will be, starting with some of the basics and going through that. We have Dr. Doug Waterman and Kevin Zimba. Both have been doing dairy judging for a very long time and also are the coaches for the 4-H dairy judging teams, and Kevin does the collegiate Cornell team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them. It's a free game plan here, so they're going to be talking, but at any point that you have questions, you can put them either in the chat or, raise your hand or, some acknowledgement, and then we'll call on you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug and Kevin to start the evening out.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everyone. Feel free, as Debbie said, to raise your hand or send in if you have a question, or send it to us later or in the chat, because we're here to answer any and all questions that you may have along the way. So with that, we'll kind of get started. I think one of the things, people judging to me is great. It's a great opportunity. I've always judged, and I know Kevin does as well. Love seeing good cattle, like going to shows and all this, but I think we forget along the way that the skill sets, the lifelong skills that we learn through dairy judging carry over into what you're going to do as adults, or even high school seniors, or going into the world with your career, because these skill sets are things you're going to use on a daily basis to be successful no matter what you're going to do in life. And you think about it, you got 12 to 15 minutes for a class. You got to observe 4 animals if you're in a judging contest. So you got to break all 4 animals down to their strengths and their weaknesses. You got to evaluate and compare them amongst the 4. Then you have to make a decision. And I think that's very important today, because too many people avoid making a decision because they don't know how to make it, or they're not comfortable. So learning how to decide, and then 2 or 3 hours later, having to defend and describe those cows to someone you've never seen before. And you have to do it from memory or off of notes. And it takes a good skill set. So you think about, you're going to be a CEO of a company, or you're going to be a dairy farmer. You're going to observe a situation. You got to evaluate it. You got to make a decision. And then you have to defend your decision of why you're going to do it. Anything to add on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. And I think, separating the concept of judging cows versus the life skills that dairy judging teaches you is pretty important. And as an example, and I got a chance to think about this today, I'm speaking today at a conference, and I looked around the room, and within that room, amongst some of the speakers were young people who had been right where all of you are today, being 4-H members, doing dairy judging. It was very interesting. I had Abigail Ratton, who is a former member of the 4-H team, and my Cornell team, Jake Dupengeiser, who judged 4-H and collegiate, and 3 or 4 others that were members of judging. And I actually left a meeting and I told them I was coming here, and a couple of them brought up the fact that, man, make sure those kids are aware, like, everything that you learn about dairy judging, you almost apply every day, from the standpoint of being able to stand up with relative confidence and give that defending position of your viewpoint with confidence, articulation, and dairy judging really gives you that opportunity to be decisive and allow that decision-making skills to then be articulated into, your reasoning. And I think that's probably for us as coaches, the most important thing that we can convey. Judging is great, and we're going to talk a lot about judging cows, but having that skill is really what draws us to this opportunity.
I know that Bill Lipinski, who's the past president of Farm Credit East, was interviewed. It's about 6, 8 years ago. And they asked him what course or what activity did he participate in that helped him prepare for being that president. And he said dairy judging for exactly the skill sets we listed there, and particularly defending that. So just remember that, some people say, well, it's just dairy judging, but you're developing skills that you're going to use the rest of your life. So for us, one of the critical parts is understanding and learning the parts of the cow. I've known people, and Kevin has too, where they can judge a cow and place them, but because they don't really know the parts of the cow, they have difficulty giving a set of reasons or explaining why. So we always try to start out with getting you to learn the basics of the parts of the cow so that when you give a set of reasons, you're able to articulate exactly why you put one animal over the other in a comparative way. And we'll go into reasons more on the next session, but you always start at the head. You got the nose, the muzzle, the bridge of the nose, the dish, the forehead, and the poll. And we'll talk about breed character when we talk about the head a lot. And then we start talking about dairiness. The neck is important. Trim down through the throat. Here's your dewlap and here's your brisket. Then you come up along the top line, which is composed of the withers, the back, and the rump. So you've got the withers as the very top of the shoulders. The crops are that indentation right behind the shoulders. Your back is the chine and the loin. And then the rump is your hooks, thurls, and pins. So understanding these terms is very, very important, particularly as you move forward with reasons. And then you have the tail and the switch, the dew claw, the pastern, the foot and toe. You got the rear udder back here. We'll talk a lot about rear udder height, width, and fullness. Teats, fore udder, milk veins. Here's your heart girth. Right in through here, point of elbow, point of shoulder, the fore rib, the rear rib, springer rib. So understanding as you young people start, spend some time learning these parts because it's very, very critical, not so much as judging and placing them, but defending and putting your reasons together. Kevin, you got comments?
No, I think that's really good. Going through it from head to tail and talking about the structure of the cow. Because when we talk about dairy judging, we're going to talk a lot about how a lot of these different parts of the cow assemble together and also form functionality. And they're part of that. Will often say acceptable or unacceptable. And understanding where these parts are and how they fit in and what category they go to will become, very normal.
Yeah, because it's important to understand, as Kevin said, what's that zone of acceptance and what is critical. So just for instance, you could have a kind of uneven top line, but a really great rear udder and fore udder versus a cow that's a little loose in the rear udder and low, but got a fantastic top line. The top line in the whole scheme of things is appearance versus the functionality of the fore and rear udder attachments. So the next is just a cow. I'm going to have Kevin go through the overall process of where we start, what we look for, as we break down these animals, and then we'll go into more detail in the next coming slides.
Yeah, so Doug, do we want to show them that first category and then come back to it?
I thought we'd just go through what you did at the spring show,
Sure,
and
sure.
then we'll go into the other, just to give them a high level approach.
Yep. And I think this is a really, of course, a Jersey cow, and you know, it's a little bit fuzzy, but it gives you a really good depiction. Where we often start is in the phrase of dairiness with dairy strength, and we'll go into that more detail. Because at the end of the day, our cows that we're looking for, one of the things that's really unique about dairy judging, which is slightly different than, say, showing, is you don't get the chance to ask the leads person when she calved or how many calves she had. You have to assume that all of the cows in the ring are created equally. And so we start with dairiness / dairy strength because of that, because your dairy cows that have that dairy quality are going to rise to the top of the class. So when we're talking about dairiness and dairy strength, you know, as Doug kind of said, we're going to start with that breed character through the head, the length through the neck, the trimness through the dewlap and brisket. We're going to look at that. We're going to go into the rib structure and look at the spacing between the ribs, the spring of the rib from behind, the angle to the rib of how angular it is, and the length of the rib. Rib structure is pretty important to dairiness. It considers openness of rib. And then we're going to talk about the cleanliness of the bone through the hips or hooks, the thurl, the pins, and then down the thigh and into the leg. So dairiness, we just say yes or no. Is this animal dairy? Is she acceptable or not? The second thing we're going to look at is udder, and starting at the back of the udder. So no different than the dairiness. Instead of starting head and going to tail, with udder we start rear udder to fore udder. So we're going to look at the height of the rear udder, the width of the rear udder, the shape and turn or curvature to the rear udder, then the levelness to the floor of the udder, the length of the fore udder, the strength of attachment of that fore udder, and then the center support or medial suspensory ligament, which we'll call crease, which runs between the rear quarters and then up through the fore quarters. The extra things like venation, teat size, shape, and placement are probably a little bit more of the, you know, reason side. But we want to ask ourselves again, is this animal got an acceptable udder or an unacceptable udder? Then we move to correctness, and correctness is very much where Doug started in the parts of the cows, like that top of the withers into the crops. We want to see an animal that blends smoothly from the top of her neck to the shoulder, and then shoulders to crops, and then in being level through the chine and loin, and levelness from hooks to pins. We want to see that thurl be placed symmetrically between the hips and pins.
Oops.
And then almost like Doug will draw a line from the thurl down to the base of the foot, where we can see that that foot intersects almost a straight line from the thurl down. And that has that intermediate set to the hock when viewed from the side. We don't want to have too much set to the leg where the animal has functionality issues. And we also don't want to have that animal be very straight in the leg. And again, having difficulty with flex and movement and mobility. So we step back and we say, is she correct? Is she acceptable or unacceptable? And then the last thing we look at is actually size and scale, which is kind of that, is she tall? Is she long? Is she deep and strong, extra or above the dairy strength portion? And that's important to recognize that it's last, because I think that's been a really nice change in dairy judging. Judging them biggest to smallest doesn't work anymore. In fact, you can easily make the argument at a lot of our largest shows throughout the world. We're not looking for extreme size and scale. We want adequate size and scale, moderate frame size, that's got that dairy strength. So again, we break it into those 4 categories, and we'll go into that a little bit more.
So if we kind of, as Kevin said, when we start the whole process, we always start with dairy strength, udder, correctness, and frame. And if you train yourself to do this, take this approach and always start from the front to the back, udder from rear udder to fore udder, correctness, front end, top line, rump and leg, and frame, this avoids making serious mistakes where you don't fall in love with an animal because she's a little taller at the withers, or you don't discredit an animal because you don't like the set to the leg. It forces you to go through the whole process from front to back, and you follow dairy strength, udder, correctness, and frame, and it reduces the mistakes that you potentially can make. So if we look at dairy strength, which is 25% on the scorecard, it's, if you want to define it, it's acceptable level of a combination of refinement and angularity with width and substance, depth and openness. And we'll show you some pictures here, but this is really important because you want the cleanliness and the angularity, but you want to have the strength and openness with it. And we'll show you some pictures here that a cow is clean cut and free of flesh, but she lacks that strength. Okay, let's go. So if we kind of look at this, the angularity scores, here's a coarse cow, here's an acceptable, and here's the kind of cow that you're looking for, because she's got that depth, she's got that openness, that angularity to the rib that Kevin talked about, and that length of the neck and the femininity about the head. Where you got a coarse head, a short, thick neck, kind of round through here with no openness to the rib and no angularity. And this is your acceptable. I'd like to see a little bit more of her. Comments, Kevin?
Yeah, the pictures are a little bit, I guess you would say extreme, but one of the parts there is the angle to the rib. If we look at our cow that's open, you can see they're using that almost like a little extreme. It's angled back, where the cow that's coarse, the rib structure is basically up and down, which almost gives her the appearance of being round or tubular in the rib because she doesn't have that angle. And if you think about the rib structure, it should angle back from the top, back towards the body, but also arch out and around the body. Those animals that are very straight up and down from their rib typically do not have the spring of rib when viewed from behind.
Think about the bow of a ship.
Mm.
Think about, that's kind of what you're looking for. Spring and angle down. And I think here's 2 great examples. If you look at the cow here on the right, yes, she's clean, she's sharp, she's angular, she's flat in the bone, she's thin in the thigh, but look at the space, the openness between the ribs here. Look at the angle coming down that sweeps down. You can almost see the arch right here to the rib. So she, as Kevin said, you've got that length of rib, you got the depth of rib, you got the openness of rib, and you got the arch or the spring to this rib structure. So it's not just the cleanliness and the angularity that's important. A lot of it's right here in this rib structure. And if you compare that to this animal over here, this animal's clean. She's free of flesh, but she has no depth, no width, no dairy strength. She's narrow here. She's narrow here through the chest. She's slab-sided. There's no arch or spring. There's no drop or length to her rib. So she's a clean-cut animal that's free of flesh, but she lacks dairy strength. Kevin, you want? Comments?
Oh, perfect, perfect.
So when this comes into the ring, you say thank you. And this comes in the ring, you say thank you, because you got a winner and you got a fourth. Pretty simple. You want to take udder, Kevin?
Sure. Udder, we've really primarily focused, like we said, rear udder height and width. That strength of ligament or medial suspensory ligament, the foreudder depth, teat size, shape, and placement, and then asking yourself, is it acceptable? We've got a couple pictures here. We'll see here at the top picture we're looking at the width to the rear udder attachment, and we can see our picture or our cow on the left doesn't have that width at the point of attachment as compared to the cow on the right. So then when we go to our we want that width, and we want uniformity of width from the top of the rear attachment to the base of the hind quarters, and adequate amount of height at the top of that rear udder attachment, where it's in conjunction with the top of the pin bones. It's call it 4 to 6 inches below there where it's starting. In our next pictures down, we're looking at teat placement on the floor of the udder, and we don't want teats that strut wide, and we don't really want teats that are too particularly close or crossing, especially in the rear. We want teat placement that's more centered on the perpendicular to the floor of the udder, pointing down. And that ties into the ligament or center support of the cow, where we want that to be firm and pulling that udder up, because that is the main ligament that is holding our udder shape and structure. So these pictures are talking a lot about teat placement, and I don't want to give a false illusion that teat placement is primary. Rear udder height and width. I think the next pictures will do. Yeah, we can go into foreudder here, where we want to see that foreudder blend smoothly into the body wall on the base, but also on the side. We don't want a foreudder that shelves between the body wall and the side of the foreudder attachment. So looking at the totality of the udder, and then going into that levelness of the floor of the udder, you don't want cows with reverse tilt. You don't want them to be tilted front to back. But again, stepping back and saying, is this a functional, good udder? Is it high and wide? And rear udder is primary. And that'll really give you a big sounding board of understanding if that animal has a high, wide, full rear udder with bloom and capacity, and it has good symmetry between the rear quarters, then it will be an acceptable udder. Too many people look at foreudder and don't look at rear udder, so we want to be able to look at both fore and rear udder, but put more of the emphasis on rear udder height than width.
So we get into feet and legs, rear feet and legs, and correctness. You don't want the animals towing out. So here's a side or front view. You can see that they're tilted. These are a little better. What you really like to do is have the rear and the front feet line up so they're straight. If you look at it from behind, here's a severely cow-hocked. She's close to the hock. You got slight cow-hocked here with towing out. What you want is the animal, when they're standing or tracking, is they move forward so they don't hock in. This gives you a lot more room for the udder and less damage to the udder, where here it's going to shove the udder forward and you got a chance of udder damage.
Yeah, and to kind of expand upon that, go back there as an example, we even want to look at that rear tracking ability in heifers, with or without an udder. And as an example, I had a couple bred heifers that I had to move this weekend, and one of the heifers had her leg position almost like that middle cow, and when she stepped, she almost would cross those hind legs, where you couldn't see the space between her rear legs. But I had another heifer that was very similar to the cow on the right. Well, she doesn't have an udder yet, but she has all the space in the world for that udder because she tracks so straight with a lot of width in her stance. So that's really important with how cows walk with mobility, and it plays into their functionality long term and their longevity as well.
And legs and correctness play a bigger portion in heifers because we don't have the udder. So it's that
Correct.
daringness and correctness that really drive that home. So this kind of gives you, Kevin was talking about, if you kind of take an imaginary line and you put it in the center of the thurl and you pull it down to the back, bottom of the foot, what you're looking for is to see how much set. And a cow that has too much set, you're going to have a big gap here. If it's too straight, the hock's going to be right on the line. But you can see that this leg is way forward and it still has significant amount of set compared to this cow here. You draw the leg down, the leg is squarely placed underneath her rump. You pull the line down there and she's got the appropriate amount of space between the hock and your imaginary line. So it's not only the set to the hock, it's the position underneath the rump that becomes critical. Frame, you want to cover that one, Kevin?
Yeah, frame kind of fits into that total size and scale. We want to make sure that, as a last check of, is she big enough? Doesn't have to be extra, but big enough. Don't pay for extra. Does she have adequate amount of overall width? And is she balanced in her frame structure? Is she, level enough? Is she, just has that adequate balance from front to back, or she's maybe not walking way uphill or walking way downhill.
And I think these two cows you can use to kind of give you the extremes on both of those on that
Yeah,
side.
yeah. So especially when we talk about that word balance, and our cow on the left is an exceptional cow of that balance from the forerib to the rear rib, and amount of size and scale, and then goes into our dairy strength as well as our first category. And then our cow on the right is narrow in the front end, lacks openness to her forerib, but lacks the overall, like, just overall size and scale to complement that dairy strength.
So I thought we'd just go through maybe some breed differences. That's the basis of the dairiness, dairy strength, udder correctness and size and scale, but maybe just spend a little bit of time looking at some breed character differences. We define it as the physical qualities of a cow for their specific breed. So even though we judge all the breeds the same way with dairy strength, udder correctness, size, and scale, there are some unique differences between the breeds. Mostly you're focusing going to be on the head and neck region. You want wide muzzles, strong jaws, long necks, and you try to look for abnormalities like a wry face or a Roman nose. Those really probably don't play a big role in how you're going to place them. But if you notice it and stay it in your reasons, it picks you up a couple points.
And breed character is really important to be able to identify, because a lot of your officials are looking for it, because it distinguishes the cow. And if you're able to put that into a set of reasons and identify the cow that has the most breed characteristic through the head and neck with that dairy strength and wide muzzle, it really can play into some bonus points.
I think here you get your two extremes. You got excellent breed character in this Holstein, long polled muzzle, prominent eye, straight across the nose, broad muzzle, long lean in the neck, alert, compared to this animal who's got a short, chuffy head. She's short from pole to muzzle, doesn't have that cleanliness, that femininity that you're looking for, that refinement, just kind of a coarse, blasé head, where this one's got that length, that refinement, the femininity, the length of neck, versus the very plain, short, stout head neck. You want to do jerseys?
This is a good one for that breed character. Our cow on the left is one of the most famous Jersey calves of the breed, that has that very distinguished wide, broad muzzle. You can even see on the base of the jaw, both the depth of it and the width of it. Yet she's very feminine in her features, very has that nice distinguished pole and dish to her face. Jersey's that dish to the face is very unique to the breed, and having that is part of that breed character. So you want that combination of width and femininity through the head. And just to use this cow as an example as well from the perspective of dairy strength, and Doug will draw that bow to the ship. That is that arch and angle and sweep to the rib structure when viewed from the front. This is a area that I think a lot of judges, young judges, forget about, is walking in front of cows. When cows get lined up side by side, I hate to say this, I like to see where the kids stand. Everybody likes to stand and look at the cows from behind. And to be honest with you, you get as much, if not more, from this front view. Because if I have this cow and I see this space and this angularity and this breed character, as long as she has an acceptable udder, she's going to be towards the top. Where our cow on the right has a scrunched up little nose that is almost wry in the face, has no length from the top of her poll to the base of the muzzle, lacks some of that kind of feminine characteristics to her face. And then when we go into her front end and her breed character through the rib structure, we can easily see that this is a heifer that even if she had an udder and had a great udder, it's going to take a lot to get around this lack of breed character and dairy strength.
I think that was an excellent point here. If you look at how wide she is right here at the shoulders, and then compare that to the spring or the width from rib to rib, that's just it's an excellent way to get a really good view of that cow's total capacity. Look at that arch and that sweep.
Yeah, I hate to say it, I always, when I was judging in 4-H, when they would line the cows up by side, I knew that all of the kids would gravitate towards the back end of the cows, and I would always walk towards the front, because I knew I could look while I didn't have to worry about walking around everybody.
Or seeing over them.
Yeah, that was a problem for me. Yes, it was.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Well noted.
Ayrshires, again, same thing. If you look at between the two, a little more stronger, maybe a little bit through the head than maybe the Holstein, the Jersey, but you still got that broad muzzle, the deep jaw, the length from poll to muzzle, but you still got that cleanliness, that angularity and femininity, that length of neck. And you compare that to an animal that's narrow in the muzzle, short from poll, and short neck. She lacks strength up through the head, and if we had a complete picture, probably she lacks strength all the way through. The head is a pretty good indicator of what the rest of the cow will look like in a lot of cases. Not always, but very seldom you see a weak head with a great body. Would you agree, Kevin?
Yeah, and in fact, when I look at that picture and I think about what might be to the left of that picture, I think of kind of a thick body with a very up and down rib structure.
Yeah. Round.
Mm-hmm.
To be. Well, I threw the same Guernsey classes in.
Yeah.
You can do the Swiss.
Yeah, and this is this is an incredible differential in that Brown Swiss breed character. Brown Swiss are such a unique breed because they really amplify the phrase dairy strength. You want to be very accurate with calling a Brown Swiss high breed character because they have to have that wide muzzle and deep jaw. I mean, that is a powerful muzzle. That is a broad, wide face and a very distinguished appearance. Yet, look at the chest floor on this cow and the width that she has across that chest floor. So that phrase of dairy strength and breed character go hand in hand with Brown Swiss. Where when we look at our cow on the right, even though we don't have a frontal view, this is a great example of that short neck. That's a thick, full neck. The nose is almost like level, like it doesn't have any type of breed character to the face. And the animal herself is just kind of a thick, coarse appearance. And again, going into that rib structure, I can't even see them, so I can't tell you where they start and begin. So you know, Brown Swiss, they've got to have strength, and they've got to be more strong than dairy in some cases, but they have to have dairy strength and breed character.
And they will, you can accept a little straighter leg in a Swiss.
Yep.
You want to do jerseys?
Yeah, and this is an example of a wry face. Always good. You're not gonna knock it per se in a placing, but having that ability to identify it, especially in a set of reasons, like if this cow was in a class and we didn't identify that twist to the face and the twist to the muzzle and nose and call it wry, as a reasons listener, I would probably deduct points if especially when it being so pronounced. And our cow on the right, you can see it's a little darker picture, but you can see that turn to the bridge of the nose, and it's almost like a corkscrew. So in jerseys, wry face, I wouldn't say it's just very, very common, but it's more common than any of the other breeds. You know, the phrase "a face and only a mother could love" sometimes comes into this statement, but being able to identify them and pick them out in a set of reasons is pretty important.
Yeah, jerseys may be more common with the wry face and wry tail.
Yes.
And then you'll have here the underbite and a Holstein, and here's a Roman nose. You know, you wouldn't knock this animal down because of that, but you would definitely want to mention it in your reasons. Because you'd gain a couple points if you did that. So just kind of finishing up on this session, it's always important to organize your thoughts. You know, you want to start out evaluating each cow as an individual. Dairy strength, udder correctness, frames, we can't repeat that enough. So you look at her and you know what's ideal, what's acceptable, and what is not acceptable. And you evaluate that individual cow before you start comparing. So you break her down, you say, okay, she's got acceptable dairy strength. She's wide in the rear udder, but low. Want to she's correct in the front end, but I want to change her a little bit in the legs, acceptable frame. And now you're thinking, what kind of animal do I have to place above her? And then you go to the second animal and go through the same process. So you need to do each cow individually for what her strengths and weaknesses are before you start comparing, and then work. If you work each category, each cow from front to back, then start doing a comparison, it reduces your risk of making a mistake.
Yeah, and I think that part is the most important part of dairy judging, because this goes into the discussion about being decisive and being able to make a decision. Dairy judging can be nerve-wracking at times, I guess is a way to say it, because you're trying to not only judge cows, you're trying to put weighting on what your priorities are. And I think Doug made a comment early on about putting too much, say for instance, you have an animal that you take a first look at her and you see that she has like large front teats. And all of a sudden you become mentally obsessed with that. And you're like, she's got to go down because of her large front teats. But in the bigger picture of things, that might not be as important. And that's why this type of format allows you to keep away from big mistakes. And so like I like to kind of think about it this way. Cow number one walks in the ring, and I kind of have a little bit of a grid almost on my notepad. Dairy strength, check. And if it's a check, that means it's acceptable. If it's a check plus, it means it's extra. If it's a check minus, I'd like to change her in that area. And if it's a minus, then she's functionally incorrect. So I kind of put her in those little buckets. So dairy strength, udder correctness, and then frame. So 4 categories, and they either get a check plus, a check minus, or a minus for each of those. And then at the end, I think the biggest thing to do is step back and just say, what's the easiest thing to do based on my little note-taking grid? And you might find that you have an animal. I'll give a perfect example. There's a 2-year-old cow that just was reserve intermediate champion at the Massachusetts Spring Show. And she's a 2-year-old that if you evaluated her under this system, you would make her a check plus in dairy strength. You'd make her a check in dairy strength, a check in udder, check in correctness, a check in frame. She's not extreme or exceptional in any of those categories, but she's really good in each category. There was another cow in the class that was taller and longer and maybe more feminine, maybe a good udder, but not as excellent, and had poorer feet and legs. The point of my saying this is we want to stay to the animals that have the least amount of faults. And by using this kind of analysis of individual animals and then stepping back and saying what's the most logical thing to do based on those notes, it kind of keeps you into a place like, you might look at your notes and go, I have 2 good cows and I have 2 lesser cows. And so I have 2 pairs. And most of your work is done at that point. It's honestly, you want to make the easiest work of the easy decisions and not sweat the small stuff. Because if it's a close pair, say of first and second, I might have it one way, Doug might have it the other way, and we would even have our own internal discussion. And we just want to make sure that you stay away from moving the cow that deserves to be in third into either first or second. And that's the bigger point of the judging discussion.
You'll never lose a contest by missing a 1, 2, or even a 3-point cut. It's getting the 4, 5, and 6s, and you got them, instead of having them first, you got them third. And the night, going back to Kevin's check, his grid, if you all of a sudden start placing the class and you look down and you've got this cow check or check minus or minus in 2 out of 3 categories, it tells you right there, she probably can't be above third. And a cow that's got all checks, she's going to be in the top 2 spots. So it allows you to pair your animals up, or gives you a quick guide check to say, okay, if I got a bunch of minuses, she's got to be third or fourth. If she got a lot of check pluses, she's got to be first or second. Then you can make some decisions from there. Just a nice quick check for you. So, we can't harp on this enough. Stick to the acceptable concept. Where's your logic? What is functionally right versus what is functionally wrong? Don't pay for extra. She may be a little taller. She may be a little cleaner. She may be a touch higher in the rear udder, but if she's not acceptable all the way through, do not get hung up on these things. What is functionally acceptable is functionally right. And don't get hung up on the minor things. I've been doing this a lot of years, and when a youngster comes up and says, well, her front teeth are too big, but she's got excellent dairy strength. She's check plus in dairy strength. She's check plus in rear udder and fore udder. She's check plus all the way through, and you put her third because you didn't like the size of her front teeth. Or a cow that's check minus everywhere except for height, and you got her first because she's taller. Those things will come back to haunt you. So don't get hung up on things that really don't matter. How does it impact her functionally, and what is that zone of acceptance? Look for your major faults, major changes. Don't sweat the small ones. And you'll hear us, if you stay with us the next 2 or 3 years, as long as you're in judging, if Kevin and I are involved, you will hear us preach what's acceptable. Use your logic, what's functionally correct, what's functionally wrong. Again, logic. What makes the most logic? Is it a top pair, top cow, bottom cow, middle pair? It's not always going to be a top pair, bottom pair, or a top cow, bottom cow. So you have to use your logic, your checklist to figure out, how does this class break down? And don't stress the small cuts. You will not lose a contest with a 1 or a 2-point, 3-point cut. That's just a flip of the coin.
Yeah, and I think part of that is understanding cuts. So when we place a class, say with the official placing is 1, 2, 3, 4. We're gonna go through that. Yeah. And say for instance, the cuts are 7, 2, and 5. What that means is the first and last pair are easy placing. So our first cow is an easy winner. Our bottom cow is an easy bottom cow. Yet that middle pair is a difficult placing. It's debatable. It's a subject to interpretation, we'll call it. For example, if the official was 1, 2, 3, 4, and you placed it 2, 1, 3, 4, you're going to get, out of a score of 50, you're going to get a 43. If you had switched the bottom pair and the official was 1, 2, 3, 4, and you placed it 1, 2, 4, 3, you'd get a 45. Where if the official's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you placed it 1, 3, 2, 4, you're going to get a 48. Our goal is to get you in a spot where you get more 48s than you do 43s or 45s, because we don't really care about the 48s. They're irrelevant. As an example, there was one year I had I call it a high functioning Cornell team, or at least they thought they were high functioning. And on day 3 of our workout week, they wanted to argue every 1 and 2 point cut that I made on farm, and it became almost obsessive, where it got argumentative. And for the rest of the week, all 1 and 2 point cuts, I made zeros, because I didn't care and I needed them to get over whether it should be 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 3, 2, 4, because those are the things that won't matter as much when you're in a contest. The biggest part is making sure that you identify in this kind of class the cow that was on top and the cow that was on bottom, and using the logic that we've talked about and will repeat many times will help you, because if this is the cuts for the class, more than likely cow number 1 was a check plus in all 4 categories. The next 2 cows were probably either checks or had 1 or 2 check minuses, and then our cow on the bottom probably had 3 check minuses or even 1 severe minus. So those are the things that really will separate you and make judging more logical, more easy, more simple. And that way you can focus more on your reasons as opposed to being worried about what the placing is.
Yeah, I guess we did that already, so.
Yeah.
Questions? Anybody got questions?
If you have a question, you can just unmute and ask it.
Anything you want repeated? Sense. We went too fast. Everybody go to sleep?
No.
Hello?
They didn't go to sleep.
Okay. Well, if you have questions later on, or you want to have them answered, just send us an email. More than happy to try to address them. Or save them for another time or whatever. We're here to educate as best we can. The best way to learn is to ask questions. Here's a chat. Oh, I'm awake. Okay, good.
Yeah, I read it.
All right.
All right, so I think we're gonna have a little bit of a change in plan. We were scheduled to have a session next week, the 9th. And we're going to have our next session on the 16th. And we will send reminders out. It would be the same link. And then our 3rd session, we're going to be on the 23rd. We're just bumping it a week. So in 2 weeks, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug and Kevin, you're going to be talking more about how to set up for doing your reasons and putting your reasons together and
Yes.
how to do that.
Yep. Some terminology, organizing your reasons, structuring your reasons. Terminology. And then the Ruffle sisters are gonna have to give a set of reasons. No. That'll be good.